sleep is sanitary salvation. And this, I think, is one of the most exciting areas in sleep science over the past 5 years. It's just ballooned, and we've been fortunate enough to do some of this work, which is the relationship between a lack of sleep and Alzheimer's disease. And it really has become a 4-part story, which is association, causation, mechanism, and then treatment hope. So what we understood about 4 or 5 years ago is that people who are typically sleeping less than 6 hours a night went on to develop far more of those sticky, toxic protein elements that are the culprits underlying Alzheimer's disease, called beta amyloid, and more recently this thing called tau protein. They're the two proteins that we believe underlie the condition of Alzheimer's disease. Then what we also found is that people who have sleep disorders, such as insomnia or sleep apnea, also have a significantly higher risk of going on to develop Alzheimer's disease later in life. But they're just associations. They don't prove causality. And then several years after that, scientists demonstrated that if you take a healthy adult and you deprive them of sleep for just one night, or you deprive them of just deep sleep for one night, you see an immediate escalation in that Alzheimer's protein, beta amyloid, circulating in the bloodstream, circulating in the cerebrospinal fluid, and also within the brain itself using brain imaging technology. So that proved causality, that you can take an otherwise healthy person, take away that thing called sleep, and you can trigger that instigation of what seems to be like the emergence of an Alzheimer's cascade in pathology. If that's true, then we ask the question, well, what is it about sleep that de-escalates that Alzheimer's disease protein in the brain? And there was just, this is, I think it's Nobel Prize worthy, but a researcher called Macon Nedergaard at the University of Rochester made 3 remarkable discoveries. She was looking at mice and what happened when they slept. And the first thing that she discovered is that the brain has a cleansing system, and we didn't think it did. Now, we knew that the body had its own cleansing system, which everyone will know about, called the lymphatic system, but we didn't think the brain did. And she discovered, in fact, it does have a cleansing system called the glymphatic system, named after the glial cells that make up this process.
Right, and those live in between the brain cells, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Glial is sort of, if you look at the Latin and Greek sort of derivative, the etymology is glue, because we used to think that they were just the cells that kind of glued the actual brain cells. They're all brain cells technically, but would glue the neurons together. But they sort of outnumber your neurons by manyfold, and they're critical. They perform lots of functions, but they form this network, this sewage system. So that was the first discovery. Then she found that that cleansing system wasn't always switched on in high flow volume across the 24-hour period. Instead, it was when those mice were asleep and when they went into deep sleep that sewage system really kicked into high gear. The final discovery, and that's what makes it relevant to Alzheimer's disease, is that she found that one of the metabolic byproducts, one of the pieces of metabolic detritus that sleep was washing away, was this toxic protein of beta amyloid. And just last year, scientists in Boston actually found a very similar pulsing cleansing mechanism in human beings. So that was a mechanism that helped us realize how this could all connect together.
Yeah.
For me, though, it may all sound very depressing, just as you mentioned for yourself, and I experienced this. The older that we get, typically the worse our sleep. And the older that we get, the greater our risk of Alzheimer's disease. And so it may sound quite a depressing story, but I think there's a silver lining here. Because unlike many of the other factors that are associated with aging and Alzheimer's disease, for example, changes in the physical structure of the brain, or even changes in the blood flow dynamics of the brain, they're fiendishly difficult to treat. And in medicine, we have no good wholesale approaches. But that sleep is a missing piece in the explanatory puzzle of aging and Alzheimer's disease is exciting because maybe we can do something about it. Perhaps what we could do is in midlife, which is when we start to see the decline of deep sleep, that's when we could intervene with optimization of sleep with lots of different methods that are being developed. And in that way, could we bend the arrow of Alzheimer's disease risk down on itself? could we shift from a model of what we have right now, which is late stage treatment, to midlife prevention? Going from a model of sick care to actually healthcare. That's one of our sort of moonshot goals. I'm incredibly excited about that.
I mean, that's the holy grail, right?
Yeah.
And I think about this all the time when I wake up after an amazing night of sleep, and then my experience throughout the day is optimal. And then the following night, I have a degraded version of that. And I wake up and I think, why can't we figure out a way to replicate this day in and day out without pharmaceutical intervention? Like, I'm trying to do all the right things, and yet it is so elusive. And part of that, yes, is age, because when you're a teenager, you can just, fall asleep in an instant and seem to get a good night's sleep no matter what. But I'm constantly thinking about, like, how do you figure this out and master it? Because if you could, it would literally change everybody's lives.